Hello and welcome to the Justice Factor. After 5 months of a debilitating strike, AMCU President Joseph Mathunjwa last week signed a deal with platinum mine owners. Looming CEO Ben Magara was quoted as saying, "There are no winners here," after the deal was signed. Today, we're joined by Joseph Mathunjwa to look back at the strike and to discuss what happens now. But first, yet another strike is looming. The National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa, NUMSA, has called upon its 220,000 members in the metal and engineering industries to go on strike to demand a 12% wage increase. To discuss this further, I'm joined by Group Labour Editor at independent newspapers, Amy Musgrave, and Deputy Editor of the Financial Mail, Ron Davey. Guys, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Ron, let me start with you. What's been the impact of these strikes, the past strike, and what will be the impact if it goes on for quite a bit of the NUMSA strike?
I mean, the first strike, AMCU strike, caused the contraction we saw in the first quarter of the economy, right? And this potential strike can take us to what we call a recession. The Reserve Bank governor spoke that we might not be going to recession, but if this strike goes on for an extended period, we could actually talk about South Africa heading back into a recession for the second time since 2009.
That means jobs are
well,
gone?
the jobs are gone. I mean, at the start of this year, there already was this negative sentiment towards emerging market economies generally. And I think South Africa's story this year is probably, out of all of them, give or take Turkey, but we have been the worst story. So this adds on to that negative sentiment that's existed over South Africa since August 2012. It's always been the story around South Africa has been negative.
Amy Musgrave, let's look at the NUMSA strike. Now, NUMSA has been for the past 2 years been hitting against its federation, COSATU. It's been banging at the ANC's door. Is this a wage strike or is this a political strike?
I think it's a bit of both. The difference, employers are offering 7%, NUMSA wants 12%. So percentage-wise, that's quite a big difference. But obviously, I mean...
NUMSA has moved from...
yeah, they moved from 15%, which is quite normal in negotiations. But obviously, it's a big year for NUMSA. I mean, if the suspension is going to happen from COSATU, it's going to be this year. So NUMSA has to show its might. They'll do very well if they close a deal very quickly. Apparently in Rand terms, I mean, I'm not an economist, but apparently in Rand terms, the difference is only just over 200 Rand. So I can't see the strike lasting as long as the platinum strike. But yeah, it's time for NUMSA, yeah, to show their force. Is
it a strike against the ANC, or is this, I mean, if that's the figure, 200 Rand or so, it's very close.
Well, one could argue it's a strike against the ANC. One could also argue because it's such a close thing that the employees could actually, you know, come down and meet NUMSA. But yeah, it's definitely going to be a show. If you look at NUMSA's numbers, I think they're sitting, their aim is by November to reach 400,000 members, and that had initially been their 2015 figure. So they're obviously feeling very confident.
If I'm an investor sitting somewhere in New York and I'm sitting on this big fund, I've got to decide where I'm taking my money. You mentioned Hungary or some other emerging market. And I look at these strikes, 5-month strike and another big one looming. What does that say about the relationship between labor, business, and government, Amy, in South Africa?
Well, I mean, obviously there's going to be, the investors are going to be concerned and things like that. Our current government is now pushing to bring some calm to the markets and things like that. But it's obviously going to take time because compared to other developing countries and even compared to developed countries, our wages are very low. So, you know, it's a give and take. I think we've still got to find that middle ground.
Do you think business is giving?
I think they are giving. I don't think they're giving enough.
You're that investor in New York, Ron Davey. What are people saying about our labor relations framework here?
I mean, the thing with South Africa's labor relations, structurally, South Africa needs to reform its conditions of employment within mining and between engineering sectors. I was speaking earlier on with a mining guy. The fact that we still to this day ship people from Eastern Cape and leave them outside mines in Marikana to stay in those shacks, that is the central problem. We've never thought of perhaps working on the Australian model where you fly in flying is pretty expensive. Maybe you drive in your workforce for 6 weeks and somehow work out a way to take them back home in the following 2 weeks. we haven't structurally sat down and said, okay, look, these are the problems of the past 100 years of South African mining in terms of the labor environment. No one has sat down and said, how do we improve these conditions?
If we're still doing things the way we did them 100 years ago, why isn't anyone, some bright spark with an MBA, sitting up and saying, it's time to change this, despite the fact that for 30 years, the NUM has been banging at that very door, for example?
I mean, the whole thing has been about percentage increases over the years. Over the past, have been 10 double-digit increases have been the call of unions like NUM. And as I sat down and looked at what are the actual problems within the mining sector. Housing, fine, housing is an issue. But if you give a worker 20,000 rand per se, 20,000 rand a month, the guy will still stay in that shack outside. He's outside those mines, so those living conditions will remain the same. That's what mining companies have been saying, is that we can, if they could afford 20,000, they don't foresee that change where suddenly there's no squatter camps outside Marikana, for instance. They will still remain there.
Amy Musgrave, one of the things that happened here is that, AMCU said we want 12,500 rand. They will get 12,500 rand in 3 years, in 3 years' time. Does that mean that other workers and other trade unions looking at this situation are saying, we could go for that as well? Is this going to lead to a situation where some unions may try to be as radical or out radical, if you will? AMCU?
I think that I think the strike has been a game changer, and even if you look at how AMCU's numbers have grown, how NUMSA's numbers are growing, in my opinion, people are turning more to militant unions because they're not seen to be sweetheart unions. They seem to be doing more. And for you and I, we can sit here and go, well, they're only getting the 12,500 in 3 years and they wanted it now. It's much more than they've got previously. And if you go on the ground and you speak to workers, they're very happy. So yes, I do think there's a chance that we'll see changes like that.
What happens if another union like NUMSA goes on the strike a week later? I know Amy Musgrave says she doesn't think it's going to take that long, but a week later, no result. A month later, 2 months later, what role, and there have been lots of mutterings about, you should have forced arbitration and so forth. What role should government play?
Actually, in this instance, perhaps government shouldn't play much of a role. They should. I mean, what we found in the AMCU strike, government almost was paid debilitating role. Maybe government should, for one, take a seat back. I know the major concern here is about the sentiment around the country, and trying to halt this attack on the country's future outlook prospects. But I think in this role, unions and employers should sit face to face, and they themselves should get it. Because once you put government there, and government generally comes on the side, because they want security, they'll come on the side of companies, want people to go back to work. So immediately, if you're sitting across the table and government's there, they are automatically on business side, because all they want is people to go back to work and some sense of normality to come into play. And that's what happened with this 5-month-long strike. I mean, now we talk about the minerals minister claiming some sense of victory, but there's no victory on his part at all.
Should the law be changed? Should the LRA be amended to force people into arbitration, as some people in government have suggested?
I don't think it should. But, I mean, government's argument is basically, well, if we do change the laws, we're going to give Labour something in return. For example, if you were going on strike for 3 days, you go to arbitration, but we won't, scab Labour, for example, won't be allowed. Labour, I can't see them agreeing to something like that very easily. I mean, if you look back at apartheid and stuff, how, the people had no rights and things like that, and now all of a sudden you want to take away their rights. Yeah, I can't see it happening.
Rondab, you get the last word. Tell me, in 1 year's time, are we going to be sitting around this table discussing the same issues as other unions go on strike, or is this the end of it?
No, I think it's continuation of it. I was just watching an interview you had earlier with the COSATU president and seeing his disconnect with NUMSA. So I think next year we could still be sitting with some level of noise around Labour in this country.
Randavi, Amy Musgrave, thanks so much for your time. It's been fascinating. After the break, we ask AMCU President Joseph Mathunjwa if the platinum mine strike was worth it.
News that moves. ENCA.com.